They wore white mantles marked with a red cross and swore vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. To the medieval world, the Knights Templar were holy warriors, defenders of pilgrims on the dangerous roads to Jerusalem. They prayed like monks, fought like knights, and claimed to own nothing at all. And yet within a century, kings were borrowing from them, popes trusted them, and entire kingdoms depended on their financial power. Somewhere along the way, something did not add up. The Templars began humbly, sleeping in stables and living off donations. But as crusades dragged on and Europe's elites sought salvation through charity, gold poured into Templar hands. Instead of hoarding it, the order did something revolutionary. They stored wealth, moved it across borders, and issued letters of credit that allowed pilgrims to deposit coins in Paris and withdraw funds in Jerusalem. Soon, castles became vaults. Commanderies became banks. The Templars financed wars, underwrote royal expenses, and safeguarded the treasuries of nobles who trusted no one else. They answered to no king, paid no taxes, and reported only to the Pope himself. Historians can explain how the system worked. What they cannot explain is how an order sworn to poverty became Europe's financial backbone. By the early 14th century, the Templars were no longer just warriors of God. They were bankers of kings, and that transformation would soon make them dangerously powerful. That contradiction would soon trigger fear, envy, and destruction. Long before modern banks existed, the Templars quietly built something Europe had never seen, a transcontinental financial system operating in the shadows of faith. Pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land faced bandits, shipwrecks, and theft, but the order offered a solution that felt almost magical. A traveler could deposit gold at a Templar house in London and receive a coded document, redeemable months later in Jerusalem. No coins changed hands, yet wealth moved safely across continents. Behind monastery walls, the Templars developed accounting practices, vault security, and record-keeping far beyond their age. They standardized currencies, assessed credit, and enforced contracts across borders that were otherwise fragmented by war and feudal law. Kings trusted them because no rival lord could touch them. Thieves feared them because their vaults were fortified like fortresses. The church protected them because their system kept crusades alive. What unsettles us historians is not that the Templars banked money, but how smoothly it worked. There were no public ledgers, no state oversight, and almost no surviving manuals explaining the system. Somehow, an order sworn to spiritual devotion mastered logistics, finance, and international trust centuries before such concepts officially existed. This was not an economy anyone could see. It left few paper trails and no monuments announcing its power, yet it moved armies, sustained kingdoms, and quietly rewired medieval Europe. And when an invisible system holds that much wealth, the question becomes unavoidable. What else was hidden within it there? Official records paint a modest picture. According to surviving charters, the Knights Templar lived off donations, land grants, and a share of crusading spoils. Enough to function, perhaps even thrive, but not enough to dominate Europe's finances. Yet contemporary witnesses described something very different, something far larger and far more troubling. Chroniclers wrote of heavily guarded convoys moving at night, wagons sealed and escorted by armed knights, sworn to silence. Local lords spoke of Templar vaults so deep that inventories took days to record. Royal officials whispered that the order possessed reserves rivaling entire kingdoms. And when inquisitors finally opened Templar strongholds, they expected to find mountains of gold. Instead, they found fragments, gold chalices, silver coins, Relics of value, yes, but nowhere near the wealth that eyewitnesses had described for decades. The contradiction stunned medieval accountants and still unsettles historians today. Donations alone cannot explain it. Crusading plunder cannot justify it. Even aggressive banking profits fall short. Some suggested exaggeration, medieval rumor inflating reality, but these accounts came from enemies and allies alike, from kings and commoners spread across regions too distant to coordinate lies. Something had been seen, handled, guarded, and then removed. The deeper scholars dig, the wider the gap becomes between what the records show and what the world remembered. And when history remembers treasure that paperwork cannot explain, suspicion replaces certainty, suggesting much of the Templar fortune existed outside official ledgers, beyond royal reach, hidden deliberately for unknown reasons and purposes still. Long before the arrests, long before the trials and executions, rumors had already begun to circulate, quietly at first, passed between merchants, whispered in royal courts, and noted cautiously by chroniclers who understood the danger of writing too much. The Knights Templar, it was said, possessed wealth that no one could fully see, measure, or trace. Even in the 13th century, officials noticed discrepancies. Estates produced less income than expected, yet the order's influence continued to grow. Treasuries appeared well supplied even after costly military losses. When lands were confiscated during minor disputes, inventories never matched the rumored abundance. Something always seemed missing, yet no one could say exactly what. Some believed the Templars had learned to divide their wealth deliberately, keeping only what was necessary in visible accounts while transferring the rest into an unseen reserve. Others suspected sacred relics of immense value, objects worth more than gold, hidden away from political reach. A few went further, suggesting knowledge itself had become a form of currency, traded quietly behind stone walls. What matters most is timing. These whispers emerged decades before King Philip moved against the order. The idea of missing treasure was not born from hindsight or conspiracy, but from contemporary unease. People sensed that the Templars were guarding something vast and untouchable, something never meant to be seized. By the time the order fell, the question was already alive. The only difference was that now, no one left alive could answer it. By the early 14th century, King Philip of France ruled an empire that looked powerful from the outside, but was rotting beneath its gold-plated surface. Wars against England and Flanders had drained the royal treasury, and extravagant court spending ensured that whatever money entered Paris left just as quickly. Again and again, Philip turned to the same lender, the Knights Templar. The irony was impossible to miss. A king crowned by divine right now depended on an order sworn to poverty. Templar treasurers funded Philip's wars, safeguarded his crown jewels, and even stored the royal treasury within their fortress in Paris. No other institution commanded that level of trust, and no other institution held that much leverage over a monarch. Debt has a way of transforming respect into resentment. As Philip's obligations grew, so did his fear. The Templars answered only to the Pope. They paid no taxes. They maintained armed strongholds across France. In effect, they were a state within the state, holding the king's finances hostage without ever raising a sword. Chroniclers later noted a shift in Philip's behavior. He began questioning the order's privileges, probing its rituals, searching for leverage. Accusations of heresy, once unthinkable, suddenly entered royal conversations. To destroy the Templars would be to erase his debts, seize their assets, and reclaim control, yet there was a risk. If the Templars truly possessed the wealth everyone believed they did, then attacking them without securing that treasure first would be catastrophic, and so the trap had to be perfect, silent, and absolute. On the morning of October 13th, 1307, France awoke to chaos disguised as order. At dawn, royal officers moved with astonishing precision, arresting Templars in Paris and across the kingdom. Commanderies were sealed. Knights were seized in their beds. Vaults were locked before anyone inside could react. The coordination was unprecedented. Medieval governments struggled to enforce local laws, let alone execute a nationwide operation overnight. Yet Philip's orders had reached every corner of France without alerting a single Templar commander. No warnings, no resistance, no escape. That silence disturbed historians for centuries. The Templars were not naive. They were seasoned strategists who had survived ambushes, sieges, and betrayals in the Holy Land, and yet they appeared utterly unprepared, or so it seemed. Outside France, events unfolded differently. In England, arrests were delayed. In Portugal, they barely happened. In Scotland, they were ignored entirely. The papal order lagged behind the king's ambition, creating a fractured response that allowed some Templars to vanish. The arrests were meant to be total. They were meant to reveal everything. Confessions would follow, vaults would open, treasure would flood the crown's coffers. But as days turned into weeks, an uncomfortable truth emerged. The trap had closed, but it had caught far less than expected. And whatever Philip hoped to seize, it was no longer where it was supposed to be. When the arrests failed to produce treasure, Philip escalated. Torture chambers filled with knights once revered as holy warriors. Under agony, men confessed to heresy, blasphemy, and secret rituals. They admitted to crimes that made their execution inevitable, yet one confession never came. No Templar, not even under unbearable pain, revealed the location of the order's wealth. They spoke of spitting on crosses and denying Christ, but not of gold. They described ceremonies, but not vaults. It was as if an unspoken line existed, one they refused to cross, even to save their lives. This silence baffled inquisitors. Medieval torture was designed to extract everything, and yet something remained untouched. Either the treasure never existed, or it had already been moved beyond reach. Some historians argue fear bound their tongues. Others believe oaths stronger than death protected the secret. A darker possibility lingers, that those who knew the truth were no longer in French prisons at all. Executions followed. Grandmaster Jacques de Molay burned in 1314, proclaiming innocence to the end. Still, no treasure emerged. The order died publicly, but its wealth did not follow it into the grave, and that absence spoke louder than any confession. Royal accountants approached the seized Templar properties with confidence. They expected warehouses of coin, caravans of gold, and vaults packed with silver. What they found instead was deeply unsettling. There were assets, certainly, land deeds, chalices, ceremonial objects, modest coin reserves, enough to prove wealth, but nowhere near the scale described by witnesses or required to sustain the order's operations for centuries. Philip's treasury remained strained. His debts were not erased. The prize he sought had vanished. Official inventories attempted to downplay the discrepancy, but the numbers betrayed them. The order's income streams had been immense. Their expenses were equally vast. The missing surplus had to exist somewhere. This failure fueled speculation even among contemporaries. If the king could not find the gold, perhaps it had never been meant for him. Perhaps the Templars had anticipated betrayal long before it came. The inventory closed with silence. No explanation, no resolution, only a widening gap between expectation and reality. That gap would soon become the foundation of one of history's greatest mysteries. La Rochelle was more than a port. It was the Templars' maritime lifeline, a heavily fortified harbor under their control. In the days before the arrests, witnesses reported strange activity there. Ships were loaded at night. Cargo was sealed. Knights moved with urgency, not ceremony. When royal forces arrived, the fleet was gone. No records list their destinations. No ports reported their arrival. It was as if the ships had slipped out of history itself. The timing was devastating to Philip's ambitions. If true, the treasure had already left France before the first arrest warrant was served. The implication was clear. Someone had known. Someone had warned them. And if the treasure sailed away, it was no longer bound by borders, kings, or papal decrees. Medieval ships rarely vanished without trace. Wrecks washed ashore. Cargo appeared in markets, yet these vessels left nothing behind, no wreckage, no cargo, no witnesses willing to speak. Theories multiplied. Some claimed the ships sailed to Portugal, where the order would later re-emerge under a new name. Others believed they reached Scotland, protected by a king already excommunicated by Rome. A few suggested destinations far stranger, beyond accepted medieval navigation. The truth remains unreachable. The fleet disappeared completely, carrying with it whatever the Templars feared losing most. If the evacuation occurred, it required planning of extraordinary scale. No written orders survived, no messages intercepted. That absence suggests something chilling. Contingency plans prepared long before betrayal, memorized, not recorded. The Templars may have expected destruction as the price of power, and they prepared accordingly. When Philip realized the treasure was gone, his victory turned hollow. He had destroyed the order, but gained little in return. The gold he needed never arrived. Instead, it haunted him, and it still haunts history. At the heart of Paris once stood a structure so imposing that even kings tread carefully around it. The Temple Fortress was not merely a monastery or barracks. It was a financial nerve center wrapped in stone and secrecy. Towering walls, guarded gates, and inner keeps formed a self-contained world where royal authority weakened and Templar rule prevailed. Inside these walls, Europe's wealth once flowed. Nobles deposited fortunes. Kings stored crown jewels. Merchants trusted the temple more than any royal mint. The fortress symbolized stability in an unstable age, a place where wealth did not merely rest, but was protected by sacred vows and steel. Yet its design raises troubling questions. Contemporary descriptions speak of multiple subterranean levels, chambers beneath chambers, some accessible only through concealed passages. These were not typical monastic cellars. They were vaults designed with forethought, redundancy, and defense against siege or betrayal. When Philip's men finally entered the temple after the arrests, they expected revelation. This was the beating heart of the order, the place where everything should converge. Instead, they encountered a building that felt strangely hollow, like a body whose vital organs had already been removed. The fortress stood intact, its walls unbroken, its guards subdued. But whatever once made it powerful was no longer there. The temple had become a shell, and its emptiness suggested that its true purpose had already been fulfilled elsewhere. As royal officials descended into the temple's lower levels, anticipation turned to confusion. Seals were broken. Doors were forced open. Torchlight swept across stone chambers that should have overflowed with wealth. Instead, they found dust, scattered containers, and signs of hurried departure. Some vaults appeared deliberately cleared, shelves stripped clean yet undamaged. Others showed evidence of recent activity, as though their contents had been removed just days before. In places, official seals lay broken, not by force, but carefully, suggesting authorized access rather than looting. This detail haunted investigators. The absence of chaos implied planning, not panic. Whatever had been removed was taken calmly, systematically by those who knew exactly where everything was stored. Royal scribes recorded what they could, but their frustration is evident in the margins of surviving documents. I noted rooms that should contain more. They reference spaces formerly used. The language betrays expectation unmet. If the arrests were truly secret, how had the vaults been emptied in advance? Either Philip's operation was compromised, or the Templars were acting on knowledge gained long before the king moved. The emptiness of those rooms became proof not of poverty, but of foresight. In the weeks following the seizure, royal interrogators sought answers from those who had worked within the temple. Guards, clerks, laborers, and servants were questioned repeatedly. At first, their testimonies aligned. Yes, wealth had once been there. Yes, it had been immense. Then stories began to shift. Some witnesses retracted earlier statements, suddenly claiming ignorance. Others disappeared entirely from records. A few were accused of perjury and quietly imprisoned. The consistency of confusion suggested pressure, fear, or something more deliberate. Historians note that this pattern mirrors other suppressed events in medieval history where inconvenient knowledge vanished along with those who possessed it. Whether through bribery, intimidation, or execution, clarity dissolved. What remained was uncertainty, and uncertainty favors myth. The more witnesses altered their stories, the stronger the sense grew that the truth was dangerous, not merely embarrassing, but threatening to powerful interests still at work. Modern historians, armed with archives and centuries of analysis, confront the same absence Philip did. The documents do not add up. The wealth described by contemporaries never appears in confiscation records. There is no credible explanation for its disappearance. Some scholars argue exaggeration. Others suggest logistical overestimation. Yet these explanations fail to address the systemic nature of the gap. Too many independent sources, too many regions, too many consistent descriptions point to something real. What remains is a void in the historical record, one that resists closure. And when history cannot explain absence, it invites interpretation. The temple's vaults were empty. That fact is indisputable. Why they were empty remains one of the most unsettling questions of medieval Europe. In 1307, Scotland existed beyond the reach of papal authority. King Robert the Bruce had been excommunicated, locked in open defiance of Rome. In this political exile, Scotland became something rare, a Christian kingdom immune to papal commands. For the fleeing Templars, this made Scotland uniquely safe. Papal warrants meant nothing there. Royal orders from France held no power. If sanctuary existed anywhere in Europe, it was north of Hadrian's Wall. Records from the period are fragmentary, but they hint at unexplained arrivals. Knights without allegiances, wealth entering quietly, states changing hands under unclear circumstances. Nothing definitive, but enough to disturb historians. Scotland's isolation created opportunity. It also created silence. In 1314, Robert the Bruce faced annihilation at Bannockburn. English forces outnumbered his army and expected easy victory. Instead, the battle ended in stunning Scottish triumph. Later legends claimed armored knights charged at a critical moment, breaking English lines. They bore no banners. They claimed no rewards. They vanished after the battle. Mainstream historians dismiss the tale, yet its persistence is troubling. If foreign knights had aided Bruce, they would have required motive, discipline, and secrecy, traits the Templars possessed in abundance. If true, Bannockburn was not merely a battle, it was a transaction. Protection in exchange for sanctuary. Decades later, Rosslyn Chapel rose near Edinburgh, funded by families linked to both the Templars and the Scottish crown. Its stonework defies explanation. Carvings depict symbols unknown in Europe at the time. Geometric patterns repeat with obsessive precision. Some believe these stones encode maps. Others see calendars, vault markers, or symbolic instructions meant only for the initiated. Official explanations fall short. Rosslyn does not speak openly. It whispers. If treasure reached Scotland, it may never have been buried in chests. It may have been transformed into land, alliances, and stone. Wealth disguised as legacy. The idea is unsettling, that the Templar gold never disappeared. It simply changed form, dissolving into history itself. And if that is true, then the treasure was never meant to be found, only preserved. In most of Europe, the suppression of the Knights Templar was brutal and final. But in Portugal, something very different occurred. King Denis watched events unfold in France with caution rather than obedience. He knew the Templars personally. He relied on them militarily, and he was unconvinced by the charges leveled against them. Instead of dissolving the order, Denis negotiated. In 1319, the Knights Templar officially vanished from Portugal, only to reappear almost immediately under a new name, the Order of Christ. The members were the same men. The properties remained intact. The fortresses stayed active. Only the insignia changed. This transformation was approved by the Pope himself, raising uncomfortable questions. If the Templars were truly heretics, why allow their continuation in any form? And if they were innocent, why destroy them elsewhere? Portugal became the exception that exposed the rule. Where others lost everything, Portuguese Templars lost nothing. Their wealth, lands, and naval infrastructure passed seamlessly into the new order's hands. Historians often describe this as administrative convenience, but the speed and completeness of the transition suggest preparation. Assets had already been consolidated, allegiances secured. Nothing appeared rushed. If the Templar treasure escaped France, Portugal suddenly looks less like a refuge and more like a destination, a place where gold could be absorbed quietly into a legitimate institution protected by papal decree. In Portugal, the order did not die, it evolved. And evolution, not destruction, is often how power truly survives. Within a century of the Templars' disappearance, Portugal achieved something extraordinary. It became the leading maritime power of Europe. Its ships ventured farther, navigated more accurately, and returned richer than any rivals. This sudden leap has long puzzled historians. Shipbuilding requires capital. Navigation requires knowledge. Exploration requires risk tolerance few kingdoms could afford. Portugal, a small nation with limited resources, somehow possessed all three. The Order of Christ financed expeditions with remarkable consistency. Its Red Cross appeared on sails, cutting through unknown waters. Its wealth underwrote failures without collapse. Its confidence suggested deep reserves beyond state coffers. Maps from this period reveal knowledge that seems premature. Coastlines appear accurate before official discovery. Winds and currents are marked with precision. Some scholars argue this knowledge came from Islamic sources. Others are unconvinced. If Templar fleets vanished from La Rochelle, their experience did not vanish with them. It might have re-emerged here, repurposed for exploration instead of crusade. What unsettles researchers is continuity. The same ports, same shipyards, same symbols, now pointed west instead of east. The Holy Land was lost, but the sea offered new horizons. Portugal's Age of Discovery did not arise from nothing. It rose on foundations laid quietly, patiently by men who understood secrecy, logistics, and long-term planning better than anyone of their age. Prince Henry the Navigator is remembered as a visionary patron of exploration. From his base at Sagres, he funded voyages down the African coast, pushing Europe's boundaries year after year, but Henry was not wealthy enough to do this alone. The Order of Christ stood behind him. As Grand Master, Henry controlled its assets. Revenues flowed into shipyards, training schools, and expeditions that yielded little immediate profit. No medieval investor would tolerate such losses without extraordinary backing. Yet the funding never stopped. This persistence suggests a reserve mentality, not a speculative one. Someone believed the rewards lay far ahead. Someone was willing to spend now for power later. Templar traditions valued long horizons. Crusades were planned over generations. Fortresses were built to outlast kings. If their gold survived, investing it into exploration fits perfectly with their mindset. Henry's voyages gradually unlocked trade routes, gold supplies, and eventually new continents. The returns were immense, but delayed. Precisely the kind of payoff only hidden wealth could afford to wait for. Official histories praise royal foresight. They rarely ask where the money truly came from. If the Templar gold reached Portugal, it did not sit idle in vaults. It transformed. It became ships, maps, ports, and influence. It became leverage over the future. By the time other European powers realized what Portugal had achieved, it was too late. Trade routes were established, colonies founded, wealth flowed back across oceans. Gold multiplied itself. This possibility reframes the entire mystery. Perhaps the treasure was never meant to be recovered. Perhaps its purpose was to be spent invisibly, shaping history without attribution. The greatest fortunes are rarely found buried. They are found invested. If true, the Templar treasure did reappear, just not as anyone expected. Although King Philip initiated the arrests, the church controlled the trials. Papal commissions gathered testimony, reviewed confessions, and decided guilt. Officially, Rome sought truth. In practice, it managed damage. The church faced a dilemma. The Templars had been its warriors. Their destruction reflected poorly on papal judgment. Admitting innocence would expose political weakness. So the trials became careful theater. Confessions were accepted when useful, ignored when inconvenient. Proceedings dragged on, diffusing outrage through time. This ambiguity protected Rome, but it also buried answers. In 2001, historians revealed the Chinon Parchment, a document hidden in Vatican archives for centuries. It proved the Pope absolved the Templars of heresy. They were forgiven, yet still destroyed. The parchment shattered the official narrative. If heresy was not the reason, something else must have been. Wealth, perhaps, or secrets far more dangerous. Despite modern openness, parts of the Vatican archives remain sealed. Requests citing Templar finances are often denied or delayed. Silence persists. Historians speculate these files concern money flows, not theology. Ledgers, transfers, correspondences that reveal where wealth truly went. If such documents exist, they would end the mystery instantly. That they remain hidden suggests someone prefers the mystery intact. 700 years later, the Church still refuses clarity. No definitive statement, no full disclosure. Sometimes silence is louder than confession, and sometimes it protects truths too powerful to release. Across Europe and beyond, strange symbols appear in places where the Knights Templar were once active. They are carved into stone walls, etched onto lintels, and hidden inside chapels and ruins. To the untrained eye, they resemble decorative marks or mason signatures. To others, they suggest something far more deliberate. These symbols repeat across regions that never communicated openly. Crosses with altered proportions, interlocking circles, stars carved with precise angles. They appear in France, Portugal, Scotland, and even in locations that should have been unknown to medieval Europeans. Their consistency raises uncomfortable questions. Some historians dismiss them as coincidence or common medieval motifs. But the problem is scale. These marks appear in clusters, not isolation, often near former Templar commanderies or along ancient trade routes. They appear where treasure hunters least expect them and vanish where logic says they should exist. What makes these symbols unsettling is their restraint. They do not announce ownership. They do not glorify the order. They whisper instead, blending into stonework as if meant to be overlooked by everyone except those who already understood their meaning. If the Templars hid something, marking it openly would have been foolish. Encoding it within common imagery, however, would ensure survival across centuries. The symbols may not point to treasure directly. They may point to a system, a language written in stone, still waiting for someone to read it correctly. Medieval builders understood geometry as sacred truth. Proportions carried meaning. Shapes reflected divine order. The Templars embraced this belief with obsessive precision. In structures linked to them, geometry is never accidental. Circles align with squares. Ratios repeat across distant sites. Angles mirror astronomical patterns. When mapped together, these structures form relationships that defy coincidence. Some researchers argue these alignments function as a geographic code. Unlike written language, geometry survives translation. It crosses borders, cultures, and centuries unchanged. A symbol carved in stone means the same thing in France as it does in Portugal. This made geometry the perfect vessel for secrets that needed to endure. Templar churches often contain measurements that correspond to distances between other sites. Some lines point toward ports, others toward inland strongholds. A few align with no known medieval landmarks at all. Critics call this pattern seeking, but pattern seeking does not explain consistency. The same ratios appear again and again, embedded by builders who left no explanations behind. If treasure existed, protecting it required more than hiding gold. It required hiding knowledge of its location. Geometry offered a way to preserve that knowledge without ever writing it down. The code may still exist. The question is whether anyone alive still understands how to read it. Throughout the 20th century, excavations tied to the Templars followed a disturbing pattern. Promising discoveries were announced. Evidence attracted attention. Then, abruptly, everything stopped. Sites were sealed for safety concerns. Funding vanished without explanation. Permits were revoked. Researchers withdrew from public view. In some cases, findings disappeared entirely, never published or displayed. One excavation beneath a former Templar chapel uncovered sealed chambers before being halted indefinitely. Another revealed subterranean tunnels aligned with symbolic carvings, only to be classified and closed. Official reasons cited instability, yet independent engineers disagreed. The pattern fuels suspicion. Archaeology rarely ends suddenly when nothing is found. It ends quietly. Abrupt shutdowns suggest something unexpected emerged. Governments deny interference, churches deny involvement, yet the consistency across countries hints at coordination or shared discomfort. If the Templar mystery were harmless fantasy, there would be no need for suppression. Curiosity would fade naturally. Instead, curiosity keeps meeting resistance. Perhaps what lies beneath these sites is not gold, but evidence. Proof that challenges official narratives of medieval power, finance, and history itself. Some doors close because they are empty. Others close because what lies beyond them should never be seen. After centuries of searching, one possibility remains uncomfortable but necessary. What if the Templar treasure was never meant to be recovered at all? Modern treasure hunters assume physical reward, chests, coins, relics. But the Templars operated on longer timelines. They thought in generations, not lifetimes. Their greatest asset was not gold, but structure. The symbols, geometry, and silence may not point to a hiding place. They may point to an idea, a system of banking, navigation, and influence designed to survive the Order's destruction. If so, searching for vaults misses the point entirely. The treasure was converted, dissolved into institutions, routes, and power networks that outlived their creators. That would explain why no excavation succeeds, why maps mislead, why symbols confuse rather than clarify. The code may not lead backward, it may lead forward. If the Templars hid anything, it may have been a method, not a fortune, a way to move wealth invisibly, to influence history without names or banners. In that case, the treasure was never lost. It was completed. Off the coast of Nova Scotia lies Oak Island, a place that has consumed centuries of obsession. Its so-called money pit has drawn engineers, treasure hunters, and investors since the late 18th century. What makes Oak Island relevant to the Templars is not folklore, but convergence. Artifacts found on the island defy simple explanation. Stone crosses resembling Templar designs, geometric alignments matching European sacred architecture, drainage systems far beyond colonial engineering. Most unsettling of all is timing. Some underground structures appear to predate known settlement. Supporters of the Templar theory argue that fleeing knights could have crossed the Atlantic long before Columbus, using maritime knowledge lost to official history. The idea sounds implausible until examined closely. Medieval maps show land masses that should not exist. Portuguese records hint at Western knowledge centuries early. Oak Island itself resists resolution. Every attempt to reach its depths triggers collapse, flooding, or sudden failure, as if the site was designed not just to hide something, but to punish intrusion. Skeptics call it coincidence layered on coincidence, but coincidence does not explain the persistence of the mystery, nor why similar engineering techniques appear nowhere else in North America. If the Templars sought absolute secrecy, distance would have been their greatest ally. An ocean would ensure that whatever they carried vanished not just from France, but from European memory entirely. Oak Island remains unresolved, and unresolved places often point toward truths history refuses to confirm. Closer to home, southern France hides its own anomalies. Beneath ruined fortresses and forgotten chapels, archaeologists have discovered sealed chambers carved deep into limestone. Some contain nothing, others contain symbols. A few contain signs of deliberate emptiness. In regions once dense with Templar commanderies, caves reveal unusual modifications. Smooth walls, cut stairways, stone doors fitted with locking mechanisms far too sophisticated for simple storage. These spaces were built to protect something, yet offer no clue what that something was. What disturbs researchers is uniformity. These chambers follow similar designs across wide geographic areas. Their construction required time, labor, and secrecy. Yet no records mention their purpose. Some excavations revealed traces of organic material, wood fragments, fabric remnants, but no valuables. As if contents were removed carefully, not looted. Local legends speak of rooms that must not be opened, of collapses following disturbance, of researchers warned away by authorities after discoveries drew attention. Whether these stories are exaggerated or not, access to many sites is now restricted. Protection orders, heritage classifications, and safety claims keep investigators out. If treasure was hidden, it may have passed through these chambers only temporarily. Waypoint, not destinations. That possibility transforms these caves from vaults into pieces of a larger, mobile strategy. History remembers discoveries that are celebrated. It rarely records those that quietly disappear. In the study of the Templars, this pattern is impossible to ignore. Several researchers who claimed breakthroughs abruptly withdrew from public discussion. Some lost funding, others changed focus entirely. A few vanished from academic circles without explanation. Documents referenced in early papers later became unavailable. Artifacts were reclassified. Excavation reports stalled indefinitely. Official explanations cite bureaucracy, but repetition breeds doubt. One French researcher claimed to have identified a financial ledger linking Templar estates across borders. The archive later denied its existence. Another team announced underground findings beneath a former commandery, then issued a sudden retraction. Conspiracy thrives where transparency fails, but even cautious historians admit the suppression pattern is unusual. If discoveries merely disproved myths, they would be published eagerly. Debunking attracts attention. Silence does not. Perhaps what emerges challenges more than treasure narratives. It may expose early globalization, hidden financial systems, or institutions that still exist in altered form. When knowledge threatens continuity, it often vanishes quietly rather than publicly contested. And so, the most compelling evidence may be what we are no longer allowed to see. The question lingers, not because answers are absent, but because they may be inconvenient. If the Templars mastered systems that predate modern finance, navigation, or secrecy, then history's timeline fractures. Acknowledging such knowledge would force reconsideration of medieval capability. It would suggest that power structures, long assumed modern, have deeper, hidden roots. That possibility is destabilizing. Institutions rely on origin stories. Nations, churches, and financial systems gain legitimacy from perceived evolution. Revealing that an outlawed medieval order laid their foundations would complicate those narratives. Perhaps that is why the treasure remains elusive, not because it is buried too deep, but because revealing its form would expose continuity where rupture is preferred. Gold can be recovered, knowledge cannot be unrevealed. If the Templar treasure exists, it may consist of records, methods, or agreements still influencing the world. Its danger lies not in wealth, but in implication. Some mysteries persist because solving them would change nothing. Others persist because solving them would change everything. The Templar gold may belong to the second category. For centuries, the search for the Templar treasure has been framed in simple terms: gold, silver, relics hidden in chests beneath stone floors. This expectation is understandable. Medieval wealth was tangible, heavy, and finite. But the Knights Templar were never simple, and their greatest strength may never have been material at all. The order controlled information. They knew trade routes, political weaknesses, and financial flows long before kings understood their own economies. They moved money without moving metal. They shifted power without drawing attention. In many ways, they mastered abstraction centuries early. If such knowledge existed, preserving it would matter more than preserving coin. Gold can be seized. Knowledge can be transferred, disguised, or embedded within institutions. Once spread, it becomes nearly impossible to destroy. This reframing explains many contradictions. Why no vault ever yielded a fortune. Why symbols confuse rather than clarify. Why records vanish while influence persists. Perhaps the treasure was not a hoard, but a blueprint, a method for controlling resources invisibly, for surviving political collapse, for reshaping the world quietly. If that is true, then asking where the gold is misses the deeper question. What system replaced it? The Templars may not have lost their wealth, they may have upgraded it, and if so, the real inheritance of the order is not buried beneath ruins, but woven into the foundations of the modern world, hiding in plain sight. When the Knights Templar vanished, many assumed their story ended in fire and ash. Yet traces of their influence appear everywhere, once one knows how to look. Banking systems based on trust rather than proximity. Maritime empires built on advanced navigation. Institutions that operate beyond national borders. These developments are often attributed to gradual progress, but progress rarely leaps forward without cause. Someone must imagine the structure before it exists. The Templars imagined systems that survived them. Their financial methods echo in modern credit. Their logistical discipline mirrors global supply chains. Their secrecy resembles modern intelligence networks. None of this proves continuity, but together it suggests lineage. If the treasure became infrastructure, it would never need to reappear. Its success would be measured not in discovery, but in permanence. This possibility is unsettling because it denies closure. There is no final vault to open, no artifact to display, only influence without attribution. The order dissolved, but its ideas may have diffused, adopted by states, churches, and merchants who never credited their source. History often celebrates visible victories. It rarely notices quiet survival. If the Templars succeeded, their greatest triumph was disappearing while ensuring their work endured. In that sense, the missing treasure is not a failure of history, but proof of a plan executed perfectly. 700 years later, the Knights Templar refuse to fade. Books are written, excavations launched, theories multiply, yet certainty remains out of reach. This persistence is not accidental. Mysteries endure when they touch unresolved anxieties. The Templars represent forbidden power, knowledge withheld, authority challenged. They embody the fear that history is curated, not complete. Every generation revisits the question because each suspects that truth lies just beyond sanctioned narratives. The missing treasure becomes a symbol of everything history might be hiding. Scholars dismiss obsession as romanticism, but obsession does not sustain itself without fuel. Documents contradict. Records end abruptly. Silence replaces explanation. These gaps keep the story alive. The Templar mystery haunts because it suggests that control of wealth and information has always depended on secrecy, that modern systems may not be as transparent as they appear. The past feels distant until it mirrors the present. Perhaps that is why the search continues. Not for gold, but for reassurance, proof that history is honest, or confirmation that it never was. Until that question is resolved, the Templars will remain unfinished business. At the end of every theory, one question survives untouched. What if the treasure was already used, not hidden, not lost, but spent exactly as intended? If the Templars anticipated destruction, they would have planned accordingly. Wealth would be converted into alliances, institutions, and future leverage. The goal would not be survival of the order, but survival of its influence. From that perspective, the absence of gold is not failure, it is success. Nothing remains to be found because nothing remains to be buried. The true treasure may be the systems that outlived medieval kings, the structures that shaped exploration, finance, and power long after the order's name was erased. If so, the greatest mistake is assuming history ends where records stop. The Templars may still be present, not as knights or monks, but as methods, principles, and quiet architectures of control. And if that is true, then uncovering their treasure would not reveal the past. It would reveal ourselves. The question is no longer where the gold is. The question is whether we are living inside its legacy.